The telegram arrived at the Carson City, Nevada post office on a scorching August morning in 1882, bearing news that would change Victoria Sawyer's life forever. Her father was dead, and she had inherited a cattle ranch she never knew existed. Victoria stood on the wooden boardwalk outside the post office, her black morning dress already dusty from the journey west, reading the lawyer's words over and over until they blurred. She was 22 years old, alone in the world, and apparently the owner of 2,000 acres of scrubland somewhere outside this sun-baked frontier town. The Philadelphia finishing school where she had spent the last 4 years seemed like a distant dream now, a place of delicate teacups and carefully practiced piano scales that had no relevance to the harsh reality pressing down on her with the Nevada heat. "You look lost, miss." The voice belonged to an older woman with kind eyes and a weathered face that spoke of decades under this relentless sun. "New to Carson City. I am looking for the Triple M Ranch," Victoria said, folding the telegram carefully. "Do you know it?" The woman's expression shifted, something between pity and concern crossing her features. "The Triple M. That is about 10 miles northeast up in the foothills. But miss, if you are thinking of visiting, you should know that place has been struggling something fierce. Old Malcolm Sawyer passed last month, and the hands have been leaving one by one. There is not much left out there but debt and dust." Victoria felt her stomach tighten. "Malcolm Sawyer was my father. The ranch is mine now." The woman studied her for a long moment, taking in Victoria's fine dress, her clean hands, her carefully styled dark hair. "Lord have mercy. You had better talk to Quinn McCarthy at the general store. He has been trying to keep that place from falling apart completely, running supplies out there on credit. If anyone knows what you are facing, it is him." The general store occupied a corner of Main Street, its false front painted with fading letters advertising everything from flour to firearms. Victoria pushed through the door, a small bell announcing her arrival, and found herself in a dim space that smelled of leather, tobacco, and coffee. Behind the counter stood a man who made her breath catch unexpectedly in her throat. Quinn McCarthy was perhaps 26 or 27, tall and lean with shoulders that strained against his worn cotton shirt. His dark hair needed cutting, curling slightly at his collar, and his face was all hard angles softened only by surprisingly gentle gray eyes. Those eyes looked up from the ledger he was studying and fixed on Victoria with an intensity that made her feel suddenly, acutely aware of how out of place she must look. "Help you, madam." His voice was deep, with a slight roughness that suggested long days in the sun and wind. "I am Victoria Sawyer. I understand you have been supplying the Triple M Ranch." Quinn set down his pencil slowly, his expression hardening. "Understood. You are here to settle the account, then." "I am here because I own the ranch now," Victoria said, lifting her chin. "My father left it to me." Something flickered across Quinn's face, too quick for her to name. He came around the counter, moving with a controlled grace that spoke of strength held carefully in check. Up close, she could see the lines at the corners of his eyes, the weathered tan that no amount of winter could fade, the small scar along his jaw. He smelled like sage and soap, and something indefinably masculine that made her pulse quicken in a way her finishing school education had not prepared her for. "Miss Sawyer," he said quietly, "I do not think you understand what you are walking into. That ranch is dying. Your father, God rest him, let things slide these last few years. The cattle have been sold off to pay debts, the buildings need repair, the water rights are being challenged by the Hendersons who own the land to the east. There are maybe 3 hands left, and they have not been paid in 2 months. I have been extending credit because your father was a good man once, but that ledger is running pretty deep in the red." "How deep?" $473. Victoria felt the blood drain from her face. She had exactly $87 to her name, saved from her small teaching salary at the school and the modest inheritance from her mother who had died when she was 10. "I see. The kindest thing you could do is sell what is left and go back east," Quinn continued, his voice gentler now. "This is no life for a woman alone, especially one who is not used to the West." The presumption stung, partly because it was true, partly because something in her refused to turn away from the only connection she had left to a father she had barely known. Malcolm Sawyer had sent her to boarding school when she was 8 years old, visited twice in 14 years, and written perhaps a dozen letters. Now he had left her this ranch, this burden, this mystery of a life he had lived far away from her. She could not explain why she felt she owed it to him or perhaps to herself to try. "I am not selling," she heard herself say. "I am going to make it work." Quinn studied her for a long moment, and she forced herself to meet his gaze steadily. Finally, he shook his head, but there was something in his expression that might have been respect. "You are going to need help. Supplies, labor, someone who knows this country and this business. I cannot extend any more credit, Miss Sawyer. I have my own bills to pay." "Then I will work for it," Victoria said, the idea forming even as she spoke. "You must need help here in the store. I can read and write, I can keep accounts, I can work. This is not a finishing school, madam. The work is physical. Loading supplies, hauling freight, dealing with cowboys and prospectors who are not always gentlemen." "I can learn," Victoria insisted. "And in exchange, you help me save the ranch. Teach me what I need to know. Help me get it back on its feet. I can give you a share of the profits, once there are profits." Quinn let out a breath that might have been a laugh if it held any humor. "There are not going to be any profits, Miss Sawyer. That is what I am trying to tell you. Then what do you lose by helping me? You have already extended credit you do not expect to see repaid. At least this way you get labor in exchange, and if by some miracle I succeed, you get paid back plus a share." She could see him considering it, practical calculations moving behind those gray eyes. He crossed his arms over his chest, and the movement made her notice the strength in his forearms, the capable hands. This was a man who worked hard for everything he had, she realized. The store might be his, but nothing had been given to him easily. "If I agree to this foolishness," Quinn said finally, "you follow my instructions exactly. You work here 6 days a week, dawn to dusk. Sundays we ride out to the ranch and work on getting it in order. You learn what I teach you about ranching, about cattle, about this country. You do not take foolish risks, and if I say something is too dangerous, you listen. Those are my terms." "Agreed," Victoria said immediately. "And you do not get romantic notions about me," Quinn added, his expression stern. "This is business. I am not some hero from a dime novel, and you are not staying. When this all falls apart, you will go back east where you belong, and I will go back to running my store. Clear?" The words should have offended her, but instead Victoria felt her lips curve into a smile. "I assure you, Mr. McCarthy, romance is the furthest thing from my mind. I am interested only in saving my ranch. It is a deal then." Quinn held out his hand and Victoria took it, feeling calluses against her palm, feeling the warmth of his skin and the firmness of his grip. The contact lasted perhaps 3 seconds too long, and when they broke apart, she thought she saw color rise slightly along his cheekbones. "You can stay in the boarding house," Quinn said, his voice rough again. "Mrs. Henderson runs a clean place, reasonable rates. Tell her I sent you and she will not charge you the first week. That gives you time to earn enough for rent. Now, there is a freight wagon that needs unloading. If you are serious about working, you might as well start now." Victoria's hands were blistered and aching by the time the sun set that first day. Her fine dress was ruined, covered in flour dust and smudged with axle grease from the barrels she had helped roll into the store's back room. Her arms trembled from the unaccustomed labor, and her back felt like it might never straighten properly again. But she had done it. She had unloaded that wagon, stocked those shelves, swept that floor, and Quinn McCarthy had watched her do it without offering help she did not ask for or pity she did not want. "You will do," he said as he locked the store's front door. His expression was carefully neutral, but she thought she detected a hint of approval in those steady gray eyes. "Be here at dawn tomorrow. We will start on the accounts." Victoria nodded, too tired to trust her voice, and walked the 3 blocks to the boarding house on unsteady legs. Only when she was alone in the small, plain room, sinking into the narrow bed, did she let the tears come. Not tears of defeat, but of exhaustion and fear and something else she could not quite name. She had burned her bridges now. She had no money for a ticket back east, no prospects except this impossible task she had set herself. All she had was her stubbornness, her pride, and a bargain with a gray-eyed storekeeper who thought she would fail. She fell asleep determined to prove him wrong. The weeks that followed were the hardest of Victoria's life. She woke before dawn each day, dressed in the simple calico dresses she purchased on credit from Quinn's store, and walked through Carson City's dusty streets as the town came to life around her. The store became her world, its rhythms and demands consuming her days. She learned to lift heavy sacks without straining her back, to calculate change in her head while dealing with impatient customers, to recognize the difference between good leather and poor, between honest men and those likely to cause trouble. Quinn was a patient but exacting teacher. He showed her once how to do something, then expected her to remember. He corrected her mistakes matter-of-factly, without anger but without softness either. He treated her like any other employee, which meant he worked her hard and expected her to keep up. Victoria found herself grateful for his refusal to coddle her, even as her body ached and her hands roughened, and her romantic notions about the West crumbled under the weight of daily reality. But there were unexpected moments, small cracks in Quinn's stern facade that intrigued her more than she wanted to admit. The way he always made sure she ate lunch, setting aside fresh bread and cheese without commenting on it. The morning she arrived to find a pair of worn but serviceable work gloves on the counter, sized for her smaller hands. The evening he noticed her limping from a turned ankle, and made her sit, while he finished closing the store himself, his movements efficient and unhurried, while he told her stories about Carson City's early days to distract her from the pain. "This town was not much more than a trading post when I arrived 8 years ago," Quinn said, sweeping the floor with steady strokes. "I was 18, cocky as hell, thought I would make my fortune in the silver mines. Worked the Comstock lode for 2 years until a tunnel collapse nearly killed me. Spent 3 months recovering, and when I could walk again, I knew I was done with mining. Used what I had saved to buy this store from old Thomas Reed. Been here ever since." "No family?" Victoria asked, propping her sore ankle on a crate. "Parents died of cholera during the war. Sister married a farmer in California, have not seen her in 6 years, though we write sometimes." Quinn's voice was matter-of-fact, but Victoria heard the loneliness underneath. "It is just me and the store now. That is enough." "Is it?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. Quinn paused in his sweeping and looked at her, really looked at her, with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Most days," he said quietly. Then he went back to work, and the moment passed. Their first Sunday working at the ranch was a revelation in how much was wrong. They rode out before dawn, Quinn on a sturdy bay gelding and Victoria on a gentle mare he borrowed from the livery stable. The Triple M occupied land in the foothills where the Sage Plains began their climb toward the Sierra Nevada mountains. It should have been beautiful, Victoria thought, with its creek running through a small valley and ponderosa pines dotting the higher elevations. Instead, she saw neglect in every direction. The ranch house itself was a single-story structure with a sagging porch and windows that had not been cleaned in months. The barn needed shingles replaced, and one of its doors hung crooked on broken hinges. Fence posts were down in half a dozen places, and the creek that should have been dammed to create a stock pond ran freely, wasted. Of the 3 ranch hands her father had employed, only 2 remained. An older Mexican man named Santiago who spoke little English, and a young cowboy called Billy who could not have been more than 19. "Boss lady," Billy said when Quinn introduced Victoria. The boy looked skeptical, his freckled face openly doubtful. "No offense, madam, but I have been trying to hold this place together with Santiago, and it is not working. We need cattle, we need repairs, we need about 6 more men and a miracle. What we do not need is a woman who does not know a steer from a saddle." "Then teach me," Victoria said, keeping her voice level despite the heat rising to her cheeks. "I am here to work, not to watch. Show me what needs to be done." Billy exchanged a glance with Santiago, who shrugged eloquently. "Your funeral, madam." What followed was a brutal education in just how far removed her life had been from this reality. Quinn and the 2 hands set to work on the most critical repairs, while Victoria tackled the house, which had been sitting empty since her father's death. She scrubbed floors, washed windows, aired out bedding that smelled of mice and neglect. Her hands, already roughened from store work, cracked and bled from the lye soap. Her back screamed in protest at the unending bending and lifting. But slowly, painfully, the house began to look livable again. By noon, when they broke for the lunch she had packed, Victoria found Quinn watching her with an unreadable expression. She was filthy, she knew, her hair escaping its pins and her dress soaked with sweat and wash water. She probably looked nothing like the refined Eastern woman who had walked into his store 6 weeks ago. "What?" she asked, too tired to be self-conscious. "Nothing," Quinn said. "I just did not think you would last this long." "The day is not over yet," Victoria pointed out, and was rewarded with the faint curve of his mouth that passed for a smile. They worked until dark, then rode back to Carson City by moonlight. Victoria was so exhausted she swayed in the saddle, and once Quinn reached out to steady her with a hand on her arm. The contact was brief, practical, nothing romantic about it. So why did her skin seem to remember his touch long after he pulled away? The pattern repeated each Sunday through September and into October. They worked from dawn to dusk at the Triple M, tackling one crisis after another. Quinn negotiated with the Henderson Ranch about water rights, using a combination of legal knowledge and sheer stubborn determination that Victoria found herself admiring. Santiago, once convinced she was serious, began teaching her about cattle in his careful, broken English. Billy remained skeptical but softened somewhat when Victoria did not flinch at the hardest, dirtiest jobs, and through it all, Quinn was there. Teaching, correcting, encouraging in his gruff way. He showed her how to read the land, how to judge grass quality and water sources. He explained herd management and breeding strategies. He taught her to ride properly, not the decorative side saddle of her youth, but astride like a ranch hand, sitting straight and moving with the horse. His hands on her waist as he helped her mount, his voice in her ear correcting her posture. His steady presence beside her as they rode the property lines together, all of it, was becoming dangerous to her peace of mind. She tried to ignore the way her heart sped up when he smiled, rare as those smiles were. She tried not to notice how his shirt clung to his shoulders when he worked, or the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he was amused. She reminded herself daily of his warning, no romantic notions. This was business. He was helping her because he had extended credit he wanted repaid, nothing more. But it was getting harder to believe that, especially on the October Sunday when everything changed. They had been working on the stock pond, which meant digging in mud under the hot sun, reinforcing the creek dam with stones and timber. It was miserable work, and by afternoon they were both filthy and exhausted. Quinn called a break, and they walked to a spot upstream where the creek ran clear and cold from its mountain source. "Go ahead and wash up," Quinn said. "I will wait downstream." Victoria nodded gratefully and waited until he disappeared around the bend before kneeling at the water's edge. She washed her face and arms, letting the cold water soothe her sun-heated skin, and was startled when she heard Quinn shout, "Victoria, do not move." His use of her first name, which he never used, froze her in place. Then she saw what he had seen. A rattlesnake, thick-bodied and dangerous, coiled not 3 feet from where she knelt. Its tail was raised, rattling a warning she had been too focused on washing to hear. Quinn appeared beside her with a speed that seemed impossible, a large rock already in his hand. He moved between her and the snake, his body a shield, and threw the rock with precision that spoke of long practice. The stone caught the snake behind its head, killing it instantly, but the force of Quinn's throw carried him forward. His boot landed on wet stone, skidded, and suddenly he was falling toward her. Victoria caught him instinctively, her hands grabbing his shirt, but his weight pulled them both down. They landed in the shallow creek with a splash, Victoria on her back in the cold water with Quinn braced above her on his forearms. For a heartbeat, they stayed frozen like that, water soaking through their clothes, the danger past but their hearts still racing. Then Victoria started to laugh. She could not help it. The absurdity of it all, the snake, the fall, the fact that they were lying in a creek in the middle of nowhere covered in mud and water. Quinn stared at her like she had lost her mind, which only made her laugh harder. "Are you hysterical?" he demanded. "No," she gasped between giggles. "I am just thinking that this is definitely not what they taught us at finishing school about interactions with gentlemen." A reluctant smile tugged at Quinn's mouth. Then he was laughing too, a rich, genuine sound she had never heard from him before. It transformed his face, erasing the hard lines of worry and work, making him look younger and more carefree than she had imagined possible. "We should get out of the water," Quinn said finally, but he did not move immediately. His eyes held hers, gray as storm clouds, and something shifted between them. The laughter faded, replaced by a tension that had nothing to do with danger, and everything to do with the way her hands were still fisted in his shirt, the way his body pressed against hers, separated only by wet fabric. "Quinn," she whispered. Not sure what she was asking, he pulled back as if burned, getting to his feet and offering her a hand up with studied formality. "We should head back. It is getting late." They did not speak much on the ride to Carson City that evening, but the silence felt different now. Charged, full of things neither of them was ready to say. November brought the first real cold, frost on the morning grass and ice at the edges of water troughs. It also brought a crisis that forced everything into the open. Victoria was working at the store on a Wednesday afternoon when Billy galloped into town, his horse lathered and his face pale. "Miss Sawyer, you need to come quick." Santiago got thrown working with that roan colt, His leg is broke bad and he is asking for you." Quinn appeared from the back room, already grabbing his coat. "Hitch up the wagon. We will need to bring him to town for the doctor." The ride to the Triple M seemed to take forever. When they arrived, they found Santiago in the bunkhouse, conscious but in obvious pain. His left leg was bent at an unnatural angle below the knee. The old Mexican met Victoria's eyes with an apology in his own. "Lo siento, señorita. I'm too old for breaking colts. I'm no good to you now." "Hush," Victoria said, kneeling beside him and taking his weathered hand. "You are going to be fine. We are taking you to the doctor." But when the doctor in Carson City set the leg and delivered his verdict, it was grim. "He will heal, but it will be months before he can do ranch work again, if ever. That was a bad break." With Santiago unable to work and winter coming on, the Triple M was down to Victoria, Quinn, and young Billy. It was not enough. They all knew it, though no one said it directly. The ranch needed cattle to generate income, but they needed money to buy cattle. They needed more hands, but they could not afford to pay them. They were trapped in an impossible situation. "I will loan you the money," Quinn said one evening after they closed the store. They were going over the accounts and the numbers told a bleak story. "I have some saved. Not a lot, but enough to buy a small herd and hire a couple more hands for the winter." "I cannot ask you to do that," Victoria protested. "You have already done too much. You are not asking, I am offering." Quinn's jaw was set in that stubborn line she had come to recognize. "Look, I have been thinking about this. The Triple M has good land, good water. With proper management it could turn a profit. Your father just let it slide too long. But if we pool resources, if I invest in the ranch as a partner instead of just a creditor, we might have a real chance." A partner. Victoria's heart was beating too fast. "A business partner," Quinn clarified, not meeting her eyes. "I would own a share of the ranch. You would still control the majority. We would split any profits based on the investment percentage. It is the smart move financially for both of us." It made perfect sense. It was logical, practical, a good business decision. So why did Victoria feel like he was offering something else entirely, something neither of them was brave enough to name? "All right," she said. "Partners." They shook hands on it, formal as strangers, while something unspoken hummed in the air between them. With Quinn's investment, things began to change. They bought a small herd of cattle, 200 head, from a rancher up north who was moving to California. They hired 2 more hands, experienced cowboys who were willing to work for modest wages and a share of the spring profits. Billy, given more responsibility, rose to the challenge and proved himself capable beyond his years. The Triple M began to look like a working ranch again. Victoria moved out to the ranch full-time in December. Living in the house her father had built while the men bunked in the repaired bunkhouse. Quinn continued running the store during the week, but spent every weekend at the Triple M, working alongside the hands and teaching Victoria everything he knew about cattle ranching. Their partnership was efficient, productive, and almost unbearably tense. Because somewhere along the way, Victoria had fallen completely in love with Quinn McCarthy. She could not say exactly when it happened. Maybe it was the day he brought her the work gloves. Maybe it was when he threw himself between her and the rattlesnake without hesitation. Maybe it was one of the 100 small moments in between. The careful teaching and quiet encouragement and steady support he gave without ever asking for anything in return. She loved the way he pushed his hair back when he was frustrated, the way he talked to the horses with a gentleness he rarely showed people, the way his face transformed when something genuinely amused him. She loved his competence, his integrity, the strength that was physical but also something deeper, a core of decency that nothing seemed to shake. She loved him, and it was tearing her apart because he had made it clear from the beginning that this was business, nothing more. The winter was mild by Nevada standards, cold but not brutal, with only a few significant snowfalls. The cattle weathered it well, and the ranch hands proved their worth. Victoria learned to manage men twice her age, to make decisions about herd management and fence repairs and feed supplies. She learned to trust her own judgment, to stand firm when challenged, to admit when she did not know something. Quinn watched her grow into the role of ranch owner with something that might have been pride in his eyes, but he never said so directly. He never said much that was personal at all anymore. He was unfailingly polite, endlessly helpful, and completely distant in any way that mattered. It was as if he had decided that maintaining a professional relationship required him to wall off any hint of the man she had glimpsed that day by the creek. It made Victoria want to scream, to shake him, to demand he acknowledge what was building between them. But she had her pride, and he had made his position clear, so she swallowed her feelings and played her part in their careful dance. Christmas came and went with a quiet dinner at the ranch, all of them together in the house Victoria had made warm and livable again. Quinn brought gifts for everyone, practical things like new gloves and warm socks, but for Victoria he had something extra. A book of poetry by Walt Whitman, well worn as if it had been read many times. "I thought you might like it," he said gruffly, not meeting her eyes. "For the evenings when you have time to read." Victoria opened the cover and saw an inscription in faded ink. "To Quinn, may you find your own open road. Mother." Her throat tightened. This had been his mother's book, precious to him, and he was giving it to her. "Quinn, I cannot take this," she whispered. "I want you to have it," he said. "She would have liked you. She was strong like you, stubborn like you." Finally, he looked at her, and the expression in his gray eyes made her breath stop. "Victoria, boss." Billy burst through the door, stamping snow from his boots. "We got trouble. 3 head of cattle are missing from the north pasture, and there are tracks heading toward Henderson's land." The moment shattered. Quinn pulled back, his face going hard and professional again. "Get the men together. We will need to track them before the trail goes cold." What followed was a tense few days of negotiations with the Hendersons, who claimed the cattle had wandered onto their land, and they had only been rounding them up to return them. It was probably true, but it highlighted the ongoing tension over property boundaries and water rights that had plagued the Triple M for years. Quinn handled it with a combination of diplomacy and firmness that Victoria could only admire, and eventually they got their cattle back without further conflict. But the almost moment between them at Christmas was not repeated. Quinn went back to being carefully distant, and Victoria tried to ignore the ache in her chest every time she looked at him. January turned to February, and February to March. The snow melted, the grass greened, and the cattle began dropping calves. Victoria spent long days and nights in the cold, helping with difficult births, learning to recognize problems before they became fatal. Her hands, once soft and refined, were now strong and scarred. Her face had color from the sun and wind. She bore little resemblance to the woman who had arrived in Carson City 8 months ago, and she did not miss that woman at all. One evening in late March, after a particularly long day of branding calves, Victoria found Quinn sitting alone on the ranch house porch, staring out at the sunset. She brought 2 cups of coffee and settled beside him without asking permission. For a long time, they sat in silence, watching the sky turn from gold to pink to purple. "My father was a stranger to me," Victoria said finally. "I spent so many years angry at him for sending me away, for choosing this life over being with me. But now that I am living it, I think I understand a little better. This land gets into your blood. The work, the challenge of it, the way every season brings something new. It is hard, but it is honest. It matters. Quinn was quiet for a moment. He talked about you sometimes, your father, always with regret. I think he knew he had made the wrong choice sending you away so young, but he did not know how to fix it. He was a proud man, Malcolm. Found it hard to admit mistakes. You knew him well, well enough. He was here when I bought the store, one of the first ranchers to give me credit when others would not. I owed him for that. Quinn paused, turning his coffee cup in his hands. That is why I kept extending credit even when the numbers did not make sense. It is why I agreed to help you. I owed him. The words hit Victoria like a physical blow. Of course, obligation, debt. That was all this had ever been to him, payment for an old kindness. How foolish she had been to imagine anything more. I see, she said, proud that her voice did not shake. Well, you have more than repaid that debt, Quinn. The ranch is profitable now. We will turn a good profit on the cattle when we sell them this fall. You can have your investment back plus interest, and I will buy out your partnership share if you want. You have fulfilled your obligation to my father's memory. You are free. Quinn turned to look at her, and something flickered in his expression. Is that what you want, for me to leave? No, her heart screamed. I want you to stay forever. I want you to love me the way I love you. I want to build a life here with you on this land that we have saved together. But her pride, wounded and bleeding, would not let her say it. I think it is what you want, she said instead. You have been pulling away for months now. Ever since that day by the creek, maybe before. You made it clear from the beginning that this was just business, and I have honored that. I am honoring it now. You do not owe me anything, Quinn. You are free to go. He stood abruptly, his coffee sloshing over the edge of his cup. You think I have been staying out of obligation. You think that is why I am here, isn't it? Victoria stood too, her own anger rising to match his. You said it yourself. You owed my father. This was about repaying a debt. It was. Quinn's voice was rough, almost anguished. At first it was. But damn it, Victoria, that stopped mattering months ago. I have been staying because I cannot make myself leave. I have been pulling away because I was terrified of this, of feeling something I swore I would never feel again. Feel what? Her heart was hammering so hard she could barely breathe. Quinn set down his cup with controlled precision, then turned to face her fully. In the fading light, his eyes were dark and fierce. I love you, he said, the words seeming torn from somewhere deep inside him. I love your stubbornness, and your courage, and the way you laugh when everything is falling apart. I love watching you wrestle with cattle twice your size and refuse to give up. I love the way you made this house a home, the way you treat the ranch hands with respect, the way you never once complained about how hard this life is. I love everything about you, and it is driving me insane because you are going to leave. Victoria stared at him, stunned. Leave? Why would I leave? Because you are refined and educated and you could have any life you wanted, Quinn said, his voice raw. Because you are beautiful and smart and you deserve more than a failing ranch and a storekeeper with calloused hands. Because this is not your world, Victoria. You belong in places with opera houses and art galleries, not shoveling manure and mending fence posts. And I will not be the reason you stay somewhere you do not belong. You fool, Victoria whispered. Then louder. You absolute fool. Do you think I have spent 8 months breaking my back on this ranch because I had nothing better to do? Do you think I worked my hands raw in your store because I enjoyed it? I did it because this is exactly where I belong. With this ranch, with this life with you. Quinn went very still. Victoria, I love you, she said, the words tumbling out now that she had started. I love your grumpy morning face and your terrible jokes and the way you teach me things without making me feel stupid. I love how gentle you are with frightened animals and how stubborn you are about everything else. I love that you gave me your mother's book of poetry and pretended it did not mean anything. I love you, Quinn McCarthy, and I have been miserable for months thinking you could never love me back." For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. Then Quinn crossed the distance between them in 2 strides and pulled her into his arms, his mouth finding hers with a desperation that matched her own. Victoria melted into him, into the kiss, into the reality of his strong arms around her and his heart pounding against hers. It was nothing like the chaste kisses she had imagined in her girlhood fantasies. It was fierce and honest and real, tasting of coffee and desire and 8 months of suppressed longing. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Quinn rested his forehead against hers. "I can only give you hard work," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "This life, this ranch, it will never be easy. I do not have wealth or prospects beyond what we can build together. All I have is hard work and stubborn hope and this land under our feet." Victoria smiled, feeling joy bubble up inside her like a spring. "Then give me your heart too," she said. "That is all I need. Your heart and your stubbornness and your partnership. Give me those and I will give you mine in return and we will build something worth having." Quinn kissed her again, slower this time, thorough and tender. When he pulled back, his eyes were bright with something that might have been tears. "You are sure? You will not regret this when the work is hard and the winters are long and I am grumpy about the price of feed." "I am absolutely sure," Victoria said firmly. "Though I reserve the right to be equally grumpy about the price of feed." He laughed, that wonderful genuine laugh she had heard so rarely, and pulled her close again. They stood like that on the porch as the stars came out, holding each other as if they could make up for all the months of careful distance with this one embrace. "Marry me," Quinn said against her hair. "I know it is too soon. I know we should wait and be sensible, but damn it, Victoria, marry me. Be my partner in everything, not just the ranch. Let me spend the rest of my life working beside you and falling asleep next to you and waking up grateful that you chose this life with me." "Yes," Victoria said, not needing to think about it for even a second. "Yes to all of it. But Quinn, we are both terrible at being sensible anyway. Why start now?" His laughter rang out across the valley, warm and free, and Victoria thought she had never heard a more beautiful sound. They were married in Carson City on a bright April morning in 1883, exactly 8 months after Victoria had first walked into Quinn's store. The ceremony was simple, held in the small church with the ranch hands and a handful of townsfolk as witnesses. Victoria wore a dress of cream silk, simple but elegant, that she had sewn herself from fabric Quinn ordered special from San Francisco. Quinn wore a new suit, dark and well-fitted, and looked so handsome it made her breath catch. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Quinn kissed her with a tenderness that made several of the women in attendance sigh audibly. Then they walked out into the sunshine together, greeted by cheers and well wishes, and climbed into Quinn's wagon for the ride back to their ranch. Their ranch. The words had never sounded so good. The Triple M thrived under their joint management. Quinn's business sense combined with Victoria's growing ranching knowledge proved to be a formidable combination. They sold their cattle that fall for an excellent price, paid off all remaining debts, and bought more land from a neighbor looking to retire. Santiago recovered enough to return to light work, and Billy proved himself valuable enough that they made him foreman. They built new outbuildings, improved the irrigation system, and bred their cattle for quality rather than just quantity. But more than the business success, Victoria treasured the life they built together. Quinn sold the store after they married, deciding he would rather work the land full-time than be tied to town. She learned that he was even more grumpy in the mornings than she had suspected, but that he made her laugh every single day. He learned that she was absolutely fierce when protecting something she loved, and that included him. They argued about cattle breeds and fence placement, and whether to expand into horses. They worked from dawn to dusk most days, their hands equally calloused, their partnership equal in every way that mattered. And at night, in the bed they shared in the ranch house that had become a real home, Quinn showed her tenderness and passion that made her understand why people wrote love songs. He traced the scars on her hands, the ones earned working his store and saving their ranch, and told her they were beautiful. He held her close and whispered his love against her skin, and Victoria knew with absolute certainty that she had found exactly where she belonged. Their first child arrived in March of 1884, a boy with his father's gray eyes and his mother's stubborn chin. They named him Malcolm, after Victoria's father, and called him Cole. Quinn was terrified to hold him at first, this tiny, perfect creature that seemed impossibly fragile. But Victoria watched her strong, capable husband learn to cradle their son with infinite gentleness and fell in love with him all over again. "I cannot believe we made this," Quinn whispered one night, watching Cole sleep in his cradle. "I cannot believe I get to have this. You and the ranch and now him. I keep thinking I am going to wake up and it will all be a dream." "It is real," Victoria assured him, taking his hand. "All of it. This is our life now, the one we built together." Cole was followed 2 years later by a daughter they named Clara, who had Victoria's dark hair and Quinn's easy smile. Then another son, James, 3 years after that. The ranch house rang with the sounds of children's laughter, with footsteps on the porch and arguments over toys and Quinn's patience in teaching small hands to rope fence posts and pet horses gently. Victoria watched her husband become a father and saw depths in him she had only glimpsed before. He was firm but kind, demanding respect but giving it in return. He taught their children about hard work and honesty and taking care of the land that supported them. He taught them that their mother was just as capable as any man, more capable than most, and they should never think differently. He loved them fiercely and showed it in 1,000 small ways. The years passed, marked by the rhythms of ranch life. There were hard times, droughts that tested their resilience and winters that claimed cattle despite their best efforts. There were conflicts with neighbors and challenges with the market and years when the profit was slim. But there were also seasons of plenty, spring mornings when the valley was so beautiful it hurt to look at. Moments of perfect contentment sitting on their porch in the evening with Quinn's hand in hers. Santiago passed in 1891, peacefully in his sleep at the age of 73. They buried him on a hill overlooking the ranch, with a simple marker, and all of them gathered to pay respects to the man who had helped Victoria learn this land. Billy, grown now and married to a girl from town, inherited Santiago's bunkhouse and stayed on as foreman, training the next generation of ranch hands. In 1895, when Victoria was 35 and Quinn 39, they celebrated their 12th anniversary by riding up to the spot where Quinn had killed the rattlesnake all those years ago. The creek still ran cold and clear, and the ponderosa pines still scented the air with their distinctive smell. They sat together on a sun-warmed rock, comfortable in the silence of long companionship. "You ever regret it?" Victoria asked. "Giving up the store, tying yourself to this land and this life?" Quinn looked at her with those gray eyes that still made her heart skip after all these years. "Never. Not once. This is exactly where I am supposed to be, with exactly who I am supposed to be with." "I feel the same," Victoria said. though I do sometimes wonder what that woman in the finishing school would think if she could see me now. Covered in dust, smelling of horses, with calluses and sun damage and gray hairs I am finding with alarming regularity. I think she would be proud, Quinn said seriously. I think she would look at what you have built, what you have become, and be amazed. I know I am, every single day. Victoria leaned against his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him, the dependability that had never wavered in all their years together. You know what I realized? That day I walked into your store, I thought I was there to save a ranch, but really I was there to find you, to find this life. The ranch was just the excuse that brought me to where I needed to be. Fate, Quinn asked, a teasing note in his voice. He had never been much for romantic notions. Hard work, Victoria corrected with a smile, and stubbornness, and refusing to give up even when sensible people would have. We built this life, Quinn. We chose it, fought for it, earned it. That is better than fate. I suppose it is, Quinn agreed. He pulled her closer, kissing the top of her head. Though I am grateful for whatever force of nature pushed you west. Divine intervention, fate, sheer stubborn determination, I do not care. I am just grateful. They sat there as the sun moved across the sky, two people who had become one partnership, one team, one life built from hard work and harder choices and love that had proven stronger than any obstacle. The ranch spread out below them, green and thriving, marked with the improvements they had made together over the years. Somewhere down there, their children were working or playing, growing up in this life they had created. Come on, Victoria said finally, standing and offering Quinn her hand. We have work to do before supper. Always work, Quinn grumbled, but he was smiling as he took her hand and let her pull him to his feet. They rode back to the ranch together, comfortable and easy, still partners in every sense after all these years. The Triple M was everything they had hoped it could be, profitable and well managed and ready to pass to the next generation when the time came. But more than that, it was home. It was the place where Victoria had found herself, where Quinn had found love, where together they had proven that hard work and stubborn hope were enough to build something lasting. That evening, after a supper filled with their children's chatter and the normal chaos of family life, Victoria stood on the porch looking out at the valley. Quinn came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. "Happy?" he asked. "Completely," Victoria said, and meant it with every fiber of her being. The years continued to pass, each one adding new chapters to their story. Cole grew into a young man with his father's work ethic and his mother's sharp mind, taking on more responsibility at the ranch and showing every sign of being ready to run it himself one day. Clara proved to be a natural with horses, training them with patience and skill that had buyers coming from as far as California. James was still finding his way, bright and curious, and full of questions about everything. In 1898, when a drought hit Nevada hard, the Triple M weathered it better than most thanks to the irrigation improvements they had made years before. They were able to help some of their neighbors whose herds were suffering, extending the same kind of credit and support that had once been extended to them. It felt right, Victoria thought, passing on the kindness they had received. Quinn's hair had gone mostly gray by then, though he was still as strong and capable as ever. He moved a bit slower on cold mornings, complained about his back after long days in the saddle, but he never stopped working. Victoria's own dark hair showed silver threads now, and there were lines at the corners of her eyes from years of squinting into the sun. But when Quinn looked at her, she still saw love in his eyes, unchanged by time or familiarity. "You are staring," she said one morning, catching him watching her as she made breakfast. "Just admiring my wife," Quinn said easily. "Is that a crime?" "It is suspicious," Victoria teased. "What do you want?" "Nothing. I have everything I want right here." Simple words, spoken casually over coffee and eggs, but they settled warm in Victoria's chest. After 18 years of marriage, he could still make her feel cherished with just a sentence. They celebrated the turn of the century in 1900 with a party at the ranch, inviting all their neighbors and friends from town. The house was packed with people, the tables groaning with food, and music spilling out into the night. Victoria stood on the porch at one point, watching everyone dance and laugh, and felt overwhelmed with gratitude for this life she had built. Quinn found her there, reading her mood the way he always could, and pulled her into his arms. "Dance with me. Here, there is no music. I can hear it just fine." And he was right. The fiddle music from inside drifted out to where they stood. Quinn waltzed her across the porch with the same competence he brought to everything, and Victoria let herself be led, trusting him completely. 20 years ago, I was running a general store and convinced I would spend my life alone," Quinn said quietly. "Then you walked in and turned everything upside down. I seem to remember you being quite resistant to said upending," Victoria pointed out. "I was terrified," Quinn admitted. "You were everything I did not know I wanted and was sure I could not have. I tried so hard not to fall in love with you. You failed spectacularly. Best failure of my life." Quinn pulled her closer, and they swayed together under the stars. "Here is to 20 more years, Victoria McCarthy. To watching our children grow, to building this ranch even stronger, to growing old together and being grumpy about it together." "That is the most romantic thing you have ever said," Victoria said dryly, but she was smiling. "I am a simple man. I promise you hard work and honest love and a partnership that will last until they bury me. That is all I have ever been able to promise." "And I told you then it was enough," Victoria reminded him. "I told you to give me your heart too, and you did. Everything else we built from that." They danced until the music stopped, until their guests began to drift home, until it was just family remaining. Cole and his new wife Sarah cleaning up the kitchen, Clara arguing with James about something inconsequential, the house alive with the sounds of the people they loved most. Victoria looked around at all of it, this life that had started with a telegram and a desperate gamble, and felt nothing but contentment. The years kept coming, as years do. There were more grandchildren eventually, Cole and Sarah's brood filling the ranch with a new generation of noise and energy. Clara married a rancher from the next valley over, a good man who treated her as an equal partner the way she deserved. James, after years of trying to find his place, discovered a talent for veterinary medicine and set up practice in Carson City, still close enough to visit often. Quinn developed a cough in the winter of 1910 that worried Victoria, but he insisted it was nothing, just age catching up with him. He was 54 years old, still active on the ranch despite his protests otherwise, still the man she had fallen in love with even if his hair was white now and his face deeply lined. "You need to see a doctor," Victoria said firmly when the cough persisted. "I am fine," Quinn insisted. "It is just winter. I will be better when spring comes." He was right, mostly. The cough improved as the weather warmed, though it never entirely went away. But Quinn McCarthy was not a man to be slowed down by something as minor as a cough. He continued working, continued teaching their grandchildren about the land, continued being the steady, reliable presence that had anchored Victoria's life for nearly 3 decades. In the spring of 1913, on an April morning much like the one when they had married 30 years before, Quinn and Victoria rode out to check on the herd. It was just the two of them, like in the old days, and Quinn seemed more energetic than he had been in months. They worked together with the easy efficiency of people who had partnered for decades, reading each other's intentions without needing words. "I want to show you something," Quinn said when they finished. He led her to a spot on the western edge of their property, where the land rose slightly to give a view of the entire valley. "I bought this section last month. Was going to wait to tell you, but I cannot keep secrets from you anyway." "Quinn McCarthy, what did you do?" "I made sure this ranch has room to keep growing for the next generation," Quinn said. "Cole will run it after us, but there is space now for all our children to have a piece if they want it. The Triple M will outlive us, Victoria. What we built together will continue." Victoria felt tears prick her eyes. Even now, he was thinking ahead, planning, making sure the legacy they had created would endure. "It is perfect." They sat together on that rise, looking out at the land they had fought for and saved and built into something remarkable. Quinn took her hand, his fingers interlacing with hers, calloused palms pressing together. "30 years ago you told me to give you my heart," Quinn said quietly. "I want you to know I never took it back, not for a second. Every day I have woken up grateful that you chose me, chose this life. You made me happier than I ever thought possible." "Past tense?" Victoria asked, alarmed by his phrasing. "Present tense," Quinn corrected with a smile. "You make me happier than I ever thought possible. Every single day, Victoria. I love you as much now as I did that day on the porch when I finally had the courage to tell you." "I love you too," Victoria said. "More if that is possible. I did not know I could love someone more over time, but you prove me wrong every day." They sat there until the sun began to set, then rode back to the ranch in companionable silence. It was a perfect day, unremarkable in its beauty, and Victoria tucked it away in her memory like a precious gem. Quinn's health held steady through that summer and into fall. He slowed down a bit more, let Cole take on more of the heavy work, but he was still Quinn, still sharp-minded and stubborn and full of opinions about everything. Still her partner in every way that mattered. The winter of 1913 was particularly harsh, with heavy snows that kept them close to the house for weeks at a time. Quinn's cough returned, worse than before, and this time when Victoria insisted on the doctor, he did not argue. The diagnosis was grim. His lungs were damaged, probably from those years working the Comstock mines decades ago, and the condition was progressive. "How long?" Victoria asked the doctor, her voice steady despite the terror clawing at her chest. "Hard to say. Months, maybe a year. I am sorry." She told Quinn when the doctor left, watching his face carefully. He was quiet for a long moment, then nodded. "Well, I am 57. That is not a bad run, all things considered. And I got 30 years with you, which is more than I had any right to hope for." "You are not giving up," Victoria said fiercely. "We will fight this." "Victoria." Quinn took her hands gently. "We will not fight the inevitable. We will make the time we have left count. That is all we can do," and they did. Quinn spent that winter and spring putting his affairs in order, making sure Cole understood everything about running the ranch, spending time with each of his children and grandchildren. He wrote letters to old friends, settled old debts, made his peace with the world. But mostly he spent time with Victoria. They talked for hours, sitting by the fire or on the porch when the weather allowed, remembering their years together. The early days when everything had seemed impossible. The first time they kissed, their wedding day, each of their children's births. The triumphs and disasters and ordinary moments that had woven together to create a life. "I would not change anything," Quinn said one evening in early summer, his breathing labored but his eyes clear. "Not a single day, not a single choice. It was all perfect because it was with you." "Even the parts where I was stubborn and difficult," Victoria asked, trying to keep her voice light. Especially those parts. Quinn smiled, that warm, genuine smile she had fallen in love with so many years ago. You were never easy, Victoria McCarthy, but you were always worth it. He died on a Sunday in July of 1914, peacefully in his sleep with Victoria beside him. He was 58 years old, and he had lived to see his children grown and successful, his grandchildren thriving, and the ranch he had helped save flourishing beyond anything they had imagined that first day in the general store. The funeral was attended by what seemed like half of Nevada. Ranchers and merchants, cowboys and farmers, all the people whose lives Quinn McCarthy had touched in his quiet, steady way. They buried him on the hill next to Santiago, with a view of the valley and the ranch, and a marker that reads simply, Quinn McCarthy, 1856–1914. Partner, husband, father. He gave his heart. Victoria stood at the graveside long after everyone else had left, looking out at the land they had built together. She felt empty, hollowed out, as if part of her soul had been buried with Quinn. But underneath the grief was gratitude. 31 years they had together. 31 years of partnership and love and building something that would outlast them both. Some people never got even a fraction of that. I love you, she whispered to the wind. Thank you for giving me your heart. Thank you for every stubborn, grumpy, wonderful moment. I will miss you every day for the rest of my life. But Victoria McCarthy was not a woman to give up, even in the face of overwhelming grief. She had a ranch to run, children to support, and a legacy to maintain. Quinn had taught her that hard work and stubborn hope could accomplish anything, and she honored his memory by continuing what they had started. The years after Quinn's death were difficult but not empty. Victoria threw herself into the ranch, working alongside Cole and making sure the Triple M continued to thrive. She watched her grandchildren grow, teaching them about their grandfather and the values he had lived by. She spent time with Clara and James, remaining the center of her family even as age began to slow her down. She never remarried. Some widows did, but Victoria had no interest. She had been blessed with one great love in her life, and that was enough. She wore Quinn's ring on a chain around her neck and talked to him sometimes, when she was alone, telling him about the children and the ranch, and how much she missed him. On her 70th birthday in 1930, Victoria sat on the porch of the ranch house surrounded by 3 generations of family. The Triple M had grown to become one of the most successful ranches in the region, exactly as Quinn had dreamed. Cole ran it with his sons now, and Victoria had officially retired, though she still offered advice whether asked for or not. Tell us the story again, Grandma, one of her great-grandchildren asked. About how you and Grandpa Quinn met. Victoria smiled, settling back in her chair. Well, it started with a telegram and a ranch I never knew existed. She told them the whole story as she had many times before. The young woman who came west with nothing but stubbornness and hope. The stern storekeeper who tried not to fall in love. The hard work and the struggles and the moment when everything changed. The children listened with wide eyes, the same way their parents had listened years before, the same way their children would listen someday. And he said he could only give me hard work, Victoria finished. So I told him to give me his heart too, and he did. That is the secret, you know. Find someone who will give you their heart and their partnership, someone who will work beside you to build something worth having. That is all you need. Victoria lived to be 78 years old, dying peacefully in her sleep on a spring morning in 1938. They buried her next to Quinn on the hill with a marker that matched his. Victoria McCarthy, 1860–1938. Partner, wife, mother. She gave her heart in return. The Triple M Ranch continued for generations after them, passed down through their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. The name McCarthy became synonymous with quality cattle and fair dealing throughout Nevada. But more than the business success, the family remembered the love story at its foundation. The refined Eastern woman and the gruff storekeeper, who found each other against all odds and built something lasting from hard work and stubborn hope, and hearts freely given. Sometimes, on quiet evenings when the wind moved through the valley, ranch hands swore they could see two figures on the hill where the old markers stood, standing together and looking out at the land they had saved. Maybe it was just shadows and wishful thinking. Or maybe it was Victoria and Quinn McCarthy, still partners after all these years, still together in the place they had chosen to call home. Either way, their legacy lived on. In the land they had fought for, in the children they had raised, in the lesson they had taught through their lives, that true love is not about grand gestures or easy promises. It is about showing up every day. It is about giving your heart and your hard work and your stubborn hope. It is about partnership and respect and building something together that neither could have created alone. That was the story of Victoria and Quinn McCarthy, ranchers and partners and lovers who found each other in the Wild West and created a love story that would be told for generations. It was not an easy story, but it was real and true and lasting. And in the end, that was all that mattered.